I'm talking about the Australian painted snipe tonight, Rostratula australis, and it's one of those many birds that were first described by John Gould. And it's been described as one of Australia's least known endemic waders, and in the presentation tonight I think you'll see why that is. So these are the birds. This is a male and a female, and of course the most obvious thing about them is the degree of sexual dimorphism between the two of them. Both of them have the same sort of white eye patch and the white shoulder strap, but apart from that their feathering and colours appear completely different. Their taxonomy, they've been put in the order Gerardiformes, probably because there really isn't anywhere else for them to go. As you'll see, they really, although they are waders, they have almost no characteristics that are the same as the other waders in that order. So family, Rostratulidae, and there are three genus. The bengalensis, which is the grey painted snipe, which occurs through Africa, in India and Southeast Asia, the Australian, Rostratula australis, and there is a South American painted snipe, and I won't even try to pronounce that name, but it's quite a different looking bird from the Australian and the bengalensis. The closest relatives are jacanas, and it's not related in any way to true snipes. And interestingly, it was only recognised as an endemic Australia species in 2008, the DNA work of Christidis and Bowles, because previously it was considered to be a subspecies of bengalensis, and we'll see during tonight's talk that that sort of legacy information pervades a lot of the so-called knowledge about the species. So looking at some details, its distribution, mainly through the southern, eastern and northern parts of Australia. There's a few in the west, but it's generally not found through the drier central parts. Its habitat, ephemeral wetlands, particularly around the margins. It's a medium-sized bird, wingspan around 140 to 160 millimetres. Female is a bit larger than the male. It's omnivorous, so it's practically anything that it can get its bill around. And its behaviour, I've written it down as uncertain, and we'll see as we go through it tonight there's a lot of reasons for that. It's recorded as being crepuscular or nocturnal. However, if you go and look online you will find any number of YouTube videos of the birds quite happily foraging and doing all the other things that birds do at all times of the day. So I don't really think that that is a true depiction of its behaviour. It's listed as being cryptic and secretive, but I think probably that's more a function of its numbers rather than its behaviour. Movements, they're largely unknown. It disperses after it's been through its breeding cycle, but whether it's migratory or not, no one's really sure. Most records, if you look in bird data, are in the October to January period. That's sort of the summer breeding period. Has it got a call? This is unknown. Bengalensis, which is widespread in terms of population numbers, has a well-documented call. The female in particular is very vocal, but there's no records for the Australian species. Fred, you haven't got one, have you? Its breeding is interesting. It appears to breed in groups, and there are non-breeding birds, particularly females, present amongst the breeding coterie. And it's one of those small percentage of birds that once the female has laid her eggs, she leaves the rest to the male to do all the incubation and the parenting. So its conservation status, whichever particular system you look at, it's endangered. And the next number is probably the most frightening thing, population. The estimate is 340. Now, we get a lot of publicity, things like our parrots from Tasmania. Sorry, I've lost. The swift parrots and and our own regent honey eaters, who, you know, very small numbers, and there's all sort of publicity about them. However, you hear very little in relation to snipe, and when you think, what is the reason for that? Well, it's probably got something to do with the fact that we know where the Swiss parrots come from, where they go to, what time of the year they're around, what particular forests they tend to prefer. So we've got a lot more knowledge about things like the regent honeyeaters and the Swiss parrots than we have about the painted snipe. So we just really, there's this complete lack of knowledge about what they do. They've been subject to a long-term population decline, and it's considered to be largely the result of land use changes in the Murray-Darling Basin. Although we don't see it in the population distribution today, it's considered that the central and southern parts of the Murray-Darling Basin were sort of a core habitat for the birds, but there's been so much alteration to that habitat that their numbers just don't appear to reflect that particular habitat anymore. Their ecology is largely uncertain, and while you may pick up, say, HANZAP, and you'll find a whole lot written about it, most of that information are legacy assumptions from when australis was considered to be a subspecies of bengalensis. So a lot of that information, if you actually track back where it comes from documents written about the behaviour of bengalensis 30, 40, 50 years ago. So really there is no up-to-date and what I would consider to be factual information about the ecology of the species. This is a rather complex figure that I put together in a paper I wrote on these birds a few years ago, mainly about their occurrence in the hunter. This covers about 55 years or so from the early mid-1960s through to 2020. And these the vertical bars there represent occurrences of the birds in the hunter. The blue line at the top there is the average rainfall for Williamtown, and the red and green line is the average rainfall for West Wyalong and for Narrandera. And up the top here, these black bars represent periods of drought in New South Wales. And so there's been three reasonably well-documented occurrences of the species in the hunter. The first one here is back in the 1970s, 1972 at Lenahan Swamp, and it was actually a breeding record. And there was about 27 birds present. The next one is a cluster of occurrences which occurred from 2002 to 2009 across a number of areas: Ash Island, Hexham Swamp, Urrawang, Lenahan's Drive, and there were 17 birds present at various times over that period. The most recent one was this one here, which occurred in 2011-14. The largest numbers were seen around the Marylands area, but other birds were seen around Bunning Swamp, Ash Island, Hexham Swamp, and there was up to 55 birds present. Now, there may have been a breeding event associated with that. It's just that no one really monitored the birds closely enough to see what they're doing, but there was a large number of male and female birds in the one location for a while, so it possibly may have been a breeding event. And most recently we had this occurrence up at Tea Gardens in January and February 2020, and I'm sure a lot of you went and twitched that bird. So what this graph actually tells us is that if you look at where these occurrences occur, these spikes here represent localised flooding within the Hunter region. So you're looking at a period after there has been some flooding, and you're also looking at a period that more or less corresponds with the back end of a drought period. So it appears as though when conditions in the central part of the state are too dry, and when we're getting to the back end of a flooding event around the Hunter, conditions seem to be right for the birds to come into the area. Whether the Hunter acts as a drought refuge or not is a matter for debate, I guess. So where are these birds and when are they found? So I'm going to briefly zip through these, so just to show you how widespread they are and how few birds there are around. So this is bird data 2017, 146 records, and you can see there in the eastern and southeastern parts and a few across the north. 2018, we're down to only 57 records, a fewer number of occurrences, particularly in the north. Numbers jumped up again in 2019, but that's probably due to this particular occurrence here south of Brisbane, where there was lots of reports. It tends to be the case where it's in a reasonably accessible area, lots of people see it, so you get lots of bird data records. 2020, you can see we're down to 98 records. There's none over in the northwest or the north, just down the east coast. 2021, you can see there's only 4 actual occurrences across New South Wales, 16 records, and then 22. This is the situation. There wasn't a single record in bird data for the birds in 2022. 2023, we have found some birds. This stop isn't quite in the right place, but at Mulgindi, there were 16 birds there, according to bird data in March. And I think eBird records show as many as 36 birds present there. Briefly, the species recoveries plans, and this is from the National Recovery Plan for the Bird 2022, so it's very current. Managing, protecting habitat, of course that's pretty standard, but this is the interesting bit. Develop and apply techniques to measure the population change. You can imagine with a bird, 400 species spread across the whole of Australia, how the hell are you ever going to manage a reasonable count of those birds that's going to give you some indication as to whether their numbers are declining or increasing. So it's a hell of a challenge. Eliminate threats, that's pretty standard, but then this is important too. Undertake research to improve knowledge of habitat requirements, biology and behaviour, and that reflects pretty much what I said earlier, that just so little is actually really known about the bird, despite all the assumptions that are made. So most recently, you will have probably heard of Matt Herring and his group had a crowd funding campaign to raise $116,000 in the last year, and they plan to feed 12 birds with satellite transmitters to monitor their movements around Australia. And they have started to implement that program. They went up to the Mulgindi area to try and find some birds, but they were a bit late. The birds had dispersed, so they missed out on that one. I believe Matt is a potential future club night speaker here, but I believe that will possibly happen after they've actually done some work with the birds and we've got some information to tell us. But the most important thing here, and Mick told me that he wants you to take particular attention to this, is that the 23 Twitchathon funds are going towards the Australian painted snipe, so he'll be only too happy to relieve you of any excess notes or coins that you have in your wallet.